They think New York is just concrete and steel, but that's not the case, right? There's trees, there's parks everywhere. Like, it's not a national park, but there's trees everywhere. People are like, I don't see the trees. It's too bad that there's no trees. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's trees everywhere. There's parks everywhere. So like, I found that to be, at least from the ground, that was kind of my motivation, is to like, let's show the beautiful side of things.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. Are you craving a social life without the hangover? I'd encourage you to join Zero Proof. It's a lighthearted community diving into all things connection, lifestyle, and fun without the drinks. From wellness tips and product highlights to real life stories and every way to have a blast beyond the bar, Zero Proof has you covered. Be a part of the Zero Proof movement and take your social game up a notch. It's honestly one of my favorite newsletters. I'm going to put the link in the show notes for you all. Check it out. And if you enjoy it, tell them that Mile 40 sent you over. Again, check out Zero Proof. Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. My deepest gratitude as we navigate the holidays, everybody. Sending you all my best. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from, check out the show notes. Pick up a copy of Audacious or Break Barriers. Use the discount code and I will sign it. Fill up those stockings. I am really, really appreciative of your continued support. I am very excited for today's guest. Today, I have Paul Seibert. He's got 15 years experience in the field of photography. His areas of photography span many genres, but he's most widely known for his aerial photography. Although he's contributed to multiple photo publications, Paul's first solo publication with Rizzoli Books, New York from the Air, was released in 2022. Along with being a full-time creator, Paul has also run large social media accounts, created, directed, produced, and hosted YouTube series. Paul has worked with brands such as Canon, New York Roadrunners, Tropicana, Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, New Yorker Nowhere, National Parks Conservation Association, and Empire State Realty Trust. Paul, I have never butchered a bio that badly, but thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, no worries. That was a mouthful, and you did well. You did well.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I've joked around about a couple times where I've slipped here and there, but that was a flat out butchering. But I know you're cool. So that being said, I want to call out. You and I met on Instagram because I did see a post that you had on the back of the New York City Marathon, and the shot was just incredible. And I honestly didn't think you were going to respond when I reached out, if I'm being, perfectly honest with you, but you responded pretty quickly. So now I'm intrigued. And I want to learn more about you. I want to learn more about your journey, and I want to learn to how you even got here, because I imagine that it's not easy for a multitude of reasons, but to be in such a niche role when it comes to aerial photography, especially in a city like New York, can't be an easy feat. So let's kick things off by just understanding a little bit about, where you from, where'd you grow up, and we'll build up from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm from the New York City metropolitan area. What that means is that I've never actually lived in the city, but I lived in Westchester County, which is north of the city, Rockland County, Bergen County. And right now, I'm actually living in Colorado. So I split time, travel back and forth. A lot of my clients are still in New York. So, which is why New York is still the main aspect of my feed. Because I go back enough to keep the archives fresh. But yeah, I grew up in that New York City area, and as I found photography, like you said, about 15 years ago now, it brought me deeper and deeper into New York. Found clients there, and through social media, found that there were people that there was this company, the helicopter company that was taking photographers up to photograph New York, kind of like we'll give you a flight and you give us some pictures, and that's how they were advertising, which was super smart back then. And I kind of I looked into it to see, is this something that I can actually do? Can I afford to go on a flight? And the answer was definitely no. But about a year or so after I discovered them, a friend of mine, um, from the creative community in New York, um, was doing what's called an air to air flight, which means there's two helicopters at the same time, kind of flying side by side, and he was doing an article for a magazine. Um, and asked me to be in the subject helicopter, taking pictures of him, taking pictures of us, basically. Um, and so, yeah, came down off of that flight. Wasn't really sure exactly how uh, everything was going to react. And yeah, I was hooked. So found a way to work with that company eventually a few years after that. And then that led to um, my book. And then, yeah, just kind of, I've been really kind of working hard to try and make this a thing.
We're gonna fill in some gaps here. You said 15 years ago, your passion for photography started. Talk to us about, like, what kind of kid were you? What were you into? Where did you essentially, start to embrace photography and learn that maybe you have something?
Well, I was a creative kid. I think I was a quiet kid, and I used my creativity to kind of uh, reach the world that was around me. Uh, Originally, or I don't know originally, but my degree is in music. I'm a jazz saxophone player, and when I was in ninth grade, I took a film photography course, and I loved it. At the time, it was more important to my dad, who was an educator, um, that I'm focusing on one thing. And I had already had probably 5 or 6 years on the saxophone, and I was I was good at it. So I put down the camera and really continued to focus on music. And music, just like this business, photography, or anything that's in the creative realm, is a tough world, unless you're really locked in and focused on everything that you have to do all the time. And I think probably wasn't mature enough, wasn't ready enough for that type of life.
Yeah. How old were you at
Fast
that
forward,
time?
I was I mean, I've been writing, after college. I wrote music and produced music, taught students, did everything I can while working another full time job. So I was in my mid 20s then. Um, and yeah, I would say, I guess, about 10 years of really not doing as much music. 2009, 2008, 2009, my wife and I went to New Mexico for a friend of hers wedding. And I'd never been to New Mexico before, so I had this little point and shoot camera uh, that was working just up until this year, and it finally died. But I started taking pictures, and I realized, like, oh man, like I remember how much I love to take pictures. And so on the heels of that trip, that little camera, that little point and shoot 8 megapixel, because that was the bomb back then, like 15 years ago, that thing was a powerhouse. And I started taking it everywhere, and it slowly grew. I found someone who was a photographer that we knew, and I asked, hey, uh, would you look at my images? Because at the time, I don't even think I don't. Instagram wasn't even a thing yet.
Yeah,
This is all like,
2009, it wasn't really.
yeah,
I was
this
a senior in college, and it really wasn't.
yeah, this was all Facebook stuff. So people were like on Facebook was like, oh man, these are great pictures. You should do something with this. You should sell these prints and blah blah blah. So, you hear it enough and you start to think, oh, maybe I can do something like this. And like I said, I went and visited someone. Really, the only photographer I knew who was more like an editorial photographer, did fashion, did news, did everything. Everything that most photographers have to do, this person did. They shot our wedding as a favor for us, and kind of just put my quote unquote portfolio before them, and they were like, yeah, these are good. You should work on depth of field, all these kind of technical things. And I pulled out my little camera. I'm like, well, this is what I'm shooting with. They're like, all right, well, go out and here's a camera that you can get. Buy a used camera first. New creatives, buy a used camera first. You don't have to go straight to the top. Get a tool that you can understand and grow into, and then go to the flagship. You don't need a flagship to start. Learn the craft first, and that's what I did. And then for a couple years, I was doing family shoots. I was doing weddings. I was still just going out and shooting. And then when Instagram came around, that's when the community started to come into play in my creative development. But um,
Do you still play the
yeah,
sax?
I do. I do. Yeah. Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, sax players just hit different. Like the sax in general, it's just a different instrument. Yeah, as someone who I didn't grow up a creative. I didn't grow up in the music world, but anytime I see a sax player, I'm drawn to the music in a much different way than any other instrument. So hearing you say that, I think is really, really, really cool. Was that the only instrument that you played, or when did you build that portion of your life?
The saxophone, yeah, was first and foremost like the from when I was started when I was 9 years old, and to this day. Along the way, I've learned how to play other instruments passably. I don't know that I would call myself, uh, a piano player, but I can write. I can write music and kind of hammer things out, and then I've learned to play the drums. Um, so that's yeah.
Hearing you speak, it's really cool hearing your mind kind of come out, and it like when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grow up? Because I'm pretty sure it wasn't, hey, I want to be an aerial photographer.
No, no. I mean, when I was younger, I really thought I was somehow going to be a musician.
Who did you look up to, if you like, from a musical perspective?
Mm. Well, I would say that I think that when I started, I was influenced by like Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, right? Um, and because saxophone was in that, and I was like, well, I mean, I could do that. That was, Born in the USA was like, on top of the charts. Revealing my age right now, subtly, but yeah, I think as I developed, my, as I went through time and started to learn jazz and started to learn influences, my mentor, um, growing up was, uh, exposed me to a saxophone player called Stan Getz, who was really kind of like did this kind of like super smooth, like Brazilian bossa nova, like beautiful tone. And then I think as I went into my 20s, I shifted that, as a 20-year-old guy, like there's a little bit more like, bravado and aggression. So like I resonated with saxophone player called Dexter Gordon, who's just a little bit more kind of flippant to the rules, which is kind of my story as well. But also like he had a leg to stand on when he broke rules. So it was somebody who I really admired creatively.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, well, I kinda wanna dig into that, when you talk about playing to your rules. Elaborate on that a little further.
Yeah. I spent a lot of years being taught things, right? As a musician. Um, and but I always had this feeling of like, okay, like, but either like, but why, or like not in like an arrogant way, but just as in like a curious of other things that are out there, like a but why. Um, like I get it. Like we need to understand. I need to understand my instrument top to bottom. I get that. I need to understand music theory. I need to understand all these things. So I think when it came to like, and all that kind of stuff was pounded into you. If that's what you want to do, this is the path to do it. Fast forward to when I was interested in photography. I was self-taught, right? I had some minor understanding of how to take a photograph. I read maybe like a book to refresh, and I think I tried to take an online course, but I was like, "This is so dumb. I can't do this." Um, and I just learned. I learned how to do it myself. I understood compositionally things that I had an eye that allowed me to see something that possibly could resonate with someone else. And so I followed that. I followed that just that feeling and that desire to want my images to resonate with people in a way that um, not necessarily for clout or for visibility or for exposure or anything like that. It was just at that time I was just really loving to do it, and it was resonating with people. So
Hearing you talk, and I think this is something that's unique to creatives in general, right? To creatives in general, there has to be a light switch click that allows them to explore. Like something has to have gone right. Like whether it was, something your parents did, something that your environment, played a role in kind of facilitating, whether it was the people that you hung around. Something had to have happened in order for this to take place where you were okay. Despite the fact that you had said that you were good at like taking instruction, you were also okay at exploration. You were okay at um, looking at things from a wider lens, no pun intended. Talk to me a little bit about where that came from. Was it your parents? Was it your friends? Was it the people that you were around?
I would say growing up, first and foremost, my parents were supportive of the arts. Both my sister and I were pursuing music. My dad was both an educator, and then on the weekends he was in a band where he was a
Amazing.
pickup drummer. He didn't have any formal training, but he had rhythm and he understood what needed to be done, and he did it, and that he made that was his side hustle. And so he was very important formationally in being permitted to explore and given the runway to to learn and to explore something that may be considered even at that time a luxury,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah, I
had
mean,
the
like, you think about it
luxury.
from your dad's perspective, like, from the way I heard it was he was an educator for stability, but he was in a band because he had the luxury to do it on the weekend. It was fun. It was also, some supplemental income perhaps. And, you know, what I wanna uncover is, did he ever did he ever position it with you like, "Hey, like, this is all good. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm encouraging this, but are you thinking about, like, where your stability is gonna come from?" Or is he like, "You know what? Like, if this is working, run with it. Like, this might be your thing."
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, my dad is definitely traditional in the sense of like you get a job and you work hard at your job and you'll get paid a good wage, and if you feel like improving yourself in that job, that's also admirable. Um, my life course is probably um, something that, well, I mean, I know for a fact because I've had this conversation with my dad. Like in I would say the last like 10 years, we've had this conversation where he's like, man, he's like, your life choices are not what I would have chosen for you. Like,
That's kind
he's
of
like,
what I
I
was
don't,
hearing. And
yeah, he's
I
like,
didn't want to
I
say
don't,
that.
no, 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 no. And but here's the thing. It's like, it's beautiful. Like I always wanted to make my parents proud. Right. That's something that I think that a lot of people, um, especially, I had parents that were involved. I was lucky enough to have parents that were involved and around and invested. And so I wanted to make them proud. And it wasn't like we had a lot of money. It was, my dad was a teacher. My mom was an executive assistant. So it wasn't like we were middle class people, and we were given this opportunity to explore, um, creatively. But on the flip side of things, it was like, well, how are you going to, where are you going to find stability? Um, and like, yeah, like I said, up until, I don't know, maybe it's not, maybe it's 5 years from there, we had a conversation where we decided, like, I had finally worked and gotten a reputation in New York as a person of substance, and, someone who could be trusted to do a good job. Um, and we decided to move to Colorado. And he was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "You just got this reputation. And worked so hard, blah blah blah, to build this thing up from nothing. And now you're leaving." I'm like, "I'm not leaving. I'm just relocating." Um, and so for him, we finally had this conversation where he was like, the life that you're choosing to live, I don't know that I would be brave enough to do it.
Yeah, I
But
mean, that's
but
part of
I'm
what I'm
proud of
getting
you."
at here. What you have
Yeah.
done, because your decision weren't reckless, right? Like it's one situation where like, your parent could be modeling this life of stability slash it's okay to explore outside and to pursue your passions as long as you maintain that stability. And then there are, children who would then go off and be, absolutely reckless in different ways about it, and then it could be alarming, for the parents to understand, okay, like, well, how do I reel them back in? But it, from what I heard and from what it appears to be the case, you were driven by curiosity, you were driven by passion, right? And it's really hard for a parent to get in the way of that, especially if the puzzle pieces are, coming together. Yes, there's going to be setbacks. Yes, there's going to be roadblocks. The road is not going to be easy. It's not going to be difficult. It's not going to be smooth. You're going to have to learn how to overcome adversity, and there's going to be some difficulty there. Yeah, no, that's understood. Um, but I think the cool thing about your story was that you were enabled and empowered to allow curiosity to lead you forward. And yeah, I mean, that's a really cool conversation to have with your pops, right? Like, and there's something really, really special about that. And I mean, do you have kids?
No, but I
Okay.
see him everywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, I have kids, and like I think about that with my kids one day. It's like you want your kids to take those risks, those calculated risks that are driven by curiosity, by a passion, because that's what drives happiness in certain fashions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, especially if you have kids, there's you're curious to see how is this world that we're living in now, which is very different from when we were growing up, right? The world is always changing. That's the one thing that remains constant, right? And life is change. Um, and we can either adapt with it or get left behind. But to see how the next generation comes in and interprets all this stimuli that maybe we didn't even have,
Yep,
um,
we did
growing
not
up,
have.
and like, information at the tips of our fingers. Like, I don't know this. It's like we're getting plugged into the matrix. It's like, I know now I know kung fu. Like, it's like we can figure that out. Like, if I don't understand it, I used to have to walk down to the library and figure it out, right? That was like a famous line in my, hey dad, mom, what is this? I don't know, look it up. And you're like, oh god. But now, like, you can
Everyone
you
can
can
look up
look it up
anything
on
in a
this.
in an instant. Yeah, now you know
Yeah,
anything, and, it's only gonna get quicker and quicker,
exactly.
the information overload, so for sure. I've been thinking about, you mentioned the story about the helicopters that offered you the opportunity, to go on and take those shots, and you were asking yourself, like, "Could I even afford this?" How much was it at the time?
Probably somewhere between $3 and $500 for, like, a half an hour flight or something like that.
And where were you in your career at that point?
That was I mean, I was 3 years in, I was still working a full-time job, um, and doing photography part-time, I think. The first 5 years of me starting into photography, I was, like, working and, like, this I wasn't like, I was a landscaper. I was working on a private estate 10 minutes from New York City year round. Like, I was chopping trees down. I was, it was hard work. It was just physical manual labor, and
Paying the bills,
that's
yeah.
yeah, that's what we were doing. And so it took some time to build the business up to be able to say like this is starting to take more of my time and more of my bandwidth away from even being present at my job. And my job like was cool enough that they allowed me for a couple years to work part-time. So I would do like 3 or 4 days a week there and have yeah, maybe I did like 3.5 days a week there while I was building the business. And when it was time to go solo, that was probably mm, we're coming up on 11, 12 years now um, of that. So the first 3 years were I was learning and I was trying to stack some chips, but we weren't living a luxurious lifestyle. It was everything was calculated, especially when you're buying a camera and you're spending, even a used camera, you're $5,000 out of pocket.
Where did you start off in the world of photography? Meaning, like, what kind of projects were you undertaking when you started?
I mean, when I first started, it was really just me like going to, Fort Lee, New Jersey and taking pictures of the George Washington Bridge. That was like 10 minutes from my house, and I was like, "Oh, this is sick," like and I started exploring like long exposure and some nature aspects. I think in the early stages, like the passion was like I'd love to be a landscape photographer. I think growing up, I was influenced really by I don't know if you were going to remember this at all, but there's this organization called the Sierra Club, and they're like nature conservation organization. When I was growing up, they would have these week at a glance calendars for the year with these incredible pictures from all over the country, and like some of these places, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is an actual like real place. This is incredible. And so when I first started taking pictures, I really wanted to like figure out how can I be a landscape photographer. And then like I'm living 10 minutes from the most photographed city in the world. Like let's be smart about this, right? Let's adapt, let's understand. And so I loved going out for sunrises and sunsets where the interaction of the natural world and the man-made worlds are most evident.
Colliding, yeah.
Right? We have beautiful clouds and colors and, like, there's all these things that can happen that can show, something that most people that don't live in the New York City area, they think New York is just concrete and steel and but that's not the case, right? There's trees, there's parks everywhere. Like it's not a national park, but it's still there's trees everywhere. People are like, I don't see the trees. It's too bad that there's no trees. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's trees everywhere. There's parks everywhere. Like so like I found that to be at least from the ground, that was kind of my motivation is to like let's show um let's show the beautiful side of things.
I love that.
And
I love
and
that. I love the way that you worded it. I mean, you're right. There is something about the the crossing over between the sunrise, and the nature element of it versus the human element of, like, especially in New York, around that time, the people that are awake, the people that are moving in the street, you know, uh, and it's not always thought about. And so to put it, in a photograph, like, it really helps you paint a picture. Um, a question out of curiosity. Well, 2 questions. First one's a little bit fun. How do you know when you have a good shot?
That takes some time, because I think as you grow in a craft, like, you're like, "This is the shot," and and, like, somebody else would be like, "Ah, is it?" Like, I think it's understanding, okay, to answer that question, I'll give you just a little bit of insight into my own development. All right. So, I think in every creative's journey, there is a moment where it goes from just doing something to really like being intentional about getting better at what you're doing. Um, and I had one of these moments where I was out uh, hiking, and I had my camera with me, and it was like it was autumn, and it was this super cool like tunnel of trees, and like at the back of the tunnel there was this like light ray that was coming down, and I wanted to take a picture of it. And it was that kind of age old adage of like the picture just doesn't do it justice. And up until that point when I would take a picture and it just wouldn't do what I was seeing justice, um, I'd be like, all right, let's keep it moving. And I think that moment was a pivotal moment where I said, like, wait a minute, hold on, dude. Like if you're gonna do this, like, and you're gonna be like for real about wanting to be a photographer, you got to figure this out. So sit here and figure it out. So what I did, as cliche as it sounds, is I made a little box like this, with my hand, and I said I identified the element that was making me want to take a picture, right? And then so I made a frame around that. And then slowly but surely, I made the box bigger to include the surrounding elements, to also what that also does, which I didn't realize at the time, but now I do, it provides some subjectivity for the people that are viewing the image, right? Okay, so here's the thing, but now let's bring everybody else into my world. And then when I would expand to the point where, oh, I'm losing the effectiveness of that
The
element
thing
that
in the
made me
middle,
want to
yeah.
take a picture in the first place. Bring it in, and then that's your image. Um,
Ah,
so there is inspiration, there is execution, but there's also consideration for, especially this day and age, for those that are going to see this image eventually, if you choose to share it. So, yeah, that's to me, that's how you make a good picture.
that's an awesome answer. And you're definitely the right person to be asking that question to, because there's a lot of us who are not in the field who, a lot of times whether it's online or whether it's even in a store, sometimes you think to yourself, like, why like, how did this picture get here? Like, it's not a bad picture, but like, how did this become the shot in the frame that's, on display right now? And so kind of getting that insight is really, really helpful. Talk to me about what photography does, for the soul of the photographer. Take yourself back to like the George Washington Bridge, right? Like, you're there, you're getting started now, right? Like, you're in nature, and you don't know where you're going to go with this. You don't know if this is going to take off for you or not. For a lot of people, quite frankly, they could be like, all right, this is really more just a hobby. Like, and that's cool if it is. Talk to me about the introspection that happens when you're out there, working on some of these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought it back to the George Washington Bridge, because I, I have a story that originated from me standing on the cliffs of the Palisades, overlooking the George Washington Bridge, and northern Manhattan, for sunrise. I was the only person out there, and it was this beautiful sunrise, beautiful, like bright red and orange sky, and I'm like, I'm bugging out. I'm like, oh my god, this is incredible. I'm like, and I'm looking down and I'm seeing like hundreds of thousands of people just commuting to work. And like in that moment, I had this thought, like, are these people seeing this? Are these people appreciating this? Right. Which made me coined this phrase, which I call everyday miracles, right? There are these moments every single day where if we just pick our heads up out of this thing, or just look around every once in a while, you're going to capture these beautiful moments that are happening, right? And as a photographer, that was what I chose to pursue, was finding these everyday miracles. And it may be something completely different from what my, quote unquote mission was for the day if I was out just shooting for fun. Um, but the point is, it changes the way that you look at the world. Um, when you're looking for beauty, when you're looking for moments that could be special, um, I feel like those are the things that fuel creatives. Um, Street photographers have this special knack of understanding a scene, understanding lighting, and finding a character that will walk through that scene for them and make it all come together. Landscape photographers spend years studying weather, studying where the sun is going to be at different times of year, what that's going to align with. Like there's so much thought that goes into photography on a high level, portrait photography, studio photography. How do I light this so that it exudes the emotion that I want the viewer to experience? Um, when you reach a certain level, the your motivation has to remain, if that makes sense. The what drives you has to remain, and for me, it's been to inspire people, um, especially from the helicopter. It's that has this dichotomy of being hands off because I'm up and away from something, but also incredibly intimate because I'm showing you things that if you're down at street level, like, you don't see
You don't even
ever.
know is happening. Yeah.
You have no idea the architectural details that go into a building, whether it's a classic building or it's a new building that people are like, "Ah, I hate this glass and steel." Like, but like, look what went into it. Like all of these things.
Like, we built this.
Right.
We
Someone
built
built
this,
this.
and you don't, yeah, like, you don't know from the ground what went into making this the, several story building that it is right now. No, that's incredible, and it's, this episode could be full of puns, but, being a photographer gives you a new lens on on the world. It's true. I mean, we don't think about this. We don't think about it. And hearing you speak to it is really, really special. Hey, Mile 40 fam. I get asked a lot about my training programs and how I set myself up for success to cross finish lines all over the world. Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Recovery is half the battle. And in order to get that recovery, I rely on clean sources of protein. That's why my go-to protein shake is Owen. Only what you need. I have one after every single workout. 100% vegan and plant-based, Owen's plant-based shakes use a multi-source protein blend of pea, pumpkin seed, and flax seeds to include all essential amino acids to promote optimal daily health. Uncompromised taste. Owen brings together the essential elements of advanced nutrition, amazingly clean ingredients, functional superiority, and uncompromised taste. Now go ahead, go to www.liveowen.com. That's spelled LIVEOWYN.com. Use code MILE40 for 20% off your next purchase. Only what you need. Out of curiosity, is there I don't know if difference is the right word, but given that your focus is it's landscapes, it's buildings, it's the aerial shots. Is it a different type of photography than like someone who is, a really well known photographer at an event? who's trying to capture, like, think about, okay, you're taking aerial shots of the marathon, and then there are the photographers on the ground taking pictures of the other runners. What's the difference there, if there is a difference, or, like, are you not interested in that kind of photography?
No, I love that kind of photography. I mean, I would say first and foremost, I would not have been as quick to pick up the skills needed to perform consistently and well in a helicopter if I didn't shoot weddings. Um, Weddings are the greatest teacher of adaptation and understanding of light, right? And the differences of light. And you have natural light outdoors, you have indoors, you have flash and bounce flash, you have off camera flash. How is that adding to the scene? Um, there are so many things that you have to do, and you have to know your camera, like to a point where everything you're doing is muscle memory, when you're shooting a wedding, because if you're pointing one way in a wedding, it could be beautifully lit, and then you turn around and it's like a corner, and it's dark, and you have to, like, oh, I got to get this shot, boom. um, it's the same thing from if I'm shooting straight ahead and looking at something that's eye level with me and getting hit by light. Then, like, if I look down and I look into, like, the caverns of New York City down at street level, I have to adjust my exposure and things like that. I would say that first and foremost, the most important thing, in my opinion, should be an understanding of light and understanding of your gear, and wherever you find your creativity in that pursuit. I'm not opposed to. I love flying around in helicopters. Don't get me wrong. And, like, my pursuit right now is to try and bring fine art imagery into the world of sports. And right now, marathons are something that this lends itself to. You see the breadth of the event. You see the culture that is involved around events like this, and then you have an iconic city like New York. Um, so combine all those things and you have these compelling images. But someone on the ground is getting more of the raw emotion of the day, and um, is aiding in the storytelling that the organizers of this race want. And what I see is, like, what I'm doing from the air is not to be thought of as a replacement for that, but as a supplement, um, to fully tell the story. Okay, we've got people on the ground that are, New York City marathons, 56,000 people were running, or 55,600 something people were running. Um, and you have people assigned to each and every single person out there as they move, should they choose to take that um, assignment. And so you're getting a combination of, like, here's the vastness not only of the city but of this event and how many people are running side by side, um, and seeing people like this big and understanding, like, um, they're all running together, but each person is running for a different reason. Everyone has their own reason, and so, like, to me, that's fascinating.
I'm just
um,
looking up because I didn't realize I have one of the New Yorker Nowhere portraits up right here. It's hung up on my wall, and it may very
oh,
well be
nice.
one of your shots.
Oh,
Uh,
sweet.
so yeah, no, it just hit me as we were recording. I'm like, holy crap, I may have one of his shots up there. But it led me to think about something, and this is more educational. For people don't know out there, when you think about shooting on a helicopter versus a drone, how high up can the drone go versus the helicopter, and even from a quality perspective, like, talk to us a little bit about the differences there.
Sure. I think we'll do pros for drones first. I think drones they can get in tighter places than I can if I'm in a helicopter, right? Um, Typically, I think it's something like they are not legally permitted, according to the FAA, to fly 400 feet beyond 400 feet, commercially. Um, does that stop people from going up, 1,500 feet in the middle of nowhere? Sure, have at it. Like, people do that in the city too, which is, I feel like, is a little bit irresponsible because, anything that will that
You don't want
okay,
anything to
so
go
here's
wrong in the city. Yeah.
right. When you're in a city and you have something connected to a controller with radio waves,
Not a good
like,
idea.
anything can happen. That thing can fall out of the sky, which is why they typically don't like people flying drones through the city. The pros of being in a helicopter are, there's adaptability. There is the amount of flight time that I can have versus a drone. A drone, typically one battery, somewhere between 25 and 35 minutes. I can be up in a helicopter for hours if I want to. Um, um, Quality wise, drones are coming up, and especially some of, like, the bigger, like, higher production value where they're putting, like, maybe my camera on a drone. Sure, like, we're starting to see there be, um, a use caseage for that. Uh, um, but I would say the focal lengths that I have, you're not putting a 500 millimeter lens on a drone. Um, and that's the majority of the things that you see uh, from the New York City Marathon. Is I'm shooting at this really, really long focal length, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, because I'm in a vibrating, shaking, moving, wind exposed aircraft. I'm trying to compose while sometimes you get a gust of wind and all of a sudden, like, this composition that you had just flies out the viewfinder. You're like, where is the bridge? Where did it go? And you have to do a hard reset, and sometimes you miss it, right? But um, uh, yeah, it's I think there are definitely, um, cases where both of these are totally appropriate, um, avenues for someone to pursue. Especially now, we're seeing a lot more of, like, the FPV type of droning, even, like, inside in, like, arenas and basketball games and things like that, where they're using that supplementally to aid in the storytelling and show the crowd, show the arena. Um, yeah, so it's, I think both have pros, and I would say at this point I think drones have a little bit more cons, because also in the sense of needing clearances with FAA and air
Yeah.
traffic control,
Yeah.
they're going to be a little bit more open, with human controlled. I'm on site, I'm a pilot, this is what I'm here to do, and I'm here working for this company, blah blah blah. As opposed to, we're gonna fly a remote controlled, you know uh
Camera all the way up.
you
Yeah.
know unmanned aerial vehicle over 55,000 people as they cross over one of the main bridges of, New York
Yeah,
City.
during one of the most highly congested events.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Um,
yeah.
that valid point. No, thanks for letting us. And it was more out of curiosity. Yeah, I wonder also as I think about like the future of the field as well. I think um, for people out there listening, probably have no idea. Um, Two more questions I wanted to ask you. First, I want to ask, when you think about your journey and you think about what you've built and, honestly, like based on what we've learned so far, we could be talking for hours. So I want to get straight to the crux here. What's been the most difficult part of this journey for you? Whether it was a moment, a series of moments, whether it was a realization, a period of realization that you had to go through. Um, was there ever a point where you almost walked away?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that these last couple of years, since I've, like, created a company and tried to bring this product to people that don't know that this could be a thing for them, um, whether it's the big leagues, Major League Baseball, college football. Like I said, the marathon has been the most receptive in that. Uh, but I would say I find myself talking to friends, anyone who'll listen, really. I find myself talking to anybody who'll listen.
I'll
But
listen, Paul.
nice, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate the space.
Yeah.
Um, but I find myself talking about the fact that I feel like at this point in my career, we're 15 years in now. Um, I've had some great opportunities. Um, I'm I don't feel like I'm at the what I know stage in my career. I feel like I'm at the who I know stage in my career. And so what I've had to learn how to do is communicate with extreme precision and care when I'm reaching out, especially on cold calls, because it's a lot of my efforts go into sending emails that never get responded to. So, like, I'm highly sensitive to someone reaching out. Like you said, you didn't even think you weren't even sure if I was going to respond. Like, that's part of something that's ingrained in me because I take such an offense to like someone not being able to be like, thanks for sending this along. We'll consider it or we'll be in touch. Like, how hard is that? Like, you took the time to read something. Give me like 10 seconds of like, not at this time. I appreciate it. Boom. Like, then I'm going to keep on moving. That's fine. Um, so I think, yeah, like I said, we've created a product here, my partner and I, who is a cinematographer. So any of the video that you see, it's he and I together sitting right next to each other, collecting stills and video simultaneously, which you can't do with a drone, by the way. And we're offering this not to take away from what's happening on the field, what's happening on in the race, but to, like I said, show the breadth of the impact of the event, of the culture, of the venue, whatever it is that's happening. Um, People don't necessarily understand that, and if you're dealing with a large corporation where like if it ain't broke, we don't need to fix it type of situation. Um, Chances in areas where creativity is the forerunner for change is scary for people. So I think the hardest part these last few years has just been to, um, yeah, to try and find a way to break in and get somebody who understands the value of something when they still think like, oh, I can just get the guy in the office's nephew takes pictures, I hear, like, he can do that.
No, I mean, I to that point, I want to call out like, while this would go back to drones, one of my favorite shots that I see, and I'm a big runner, obviously. Like, I love the shots that are over the track, watching the runners run around the track from that aerial view where you see the back of the runner's head. Because a lot of times on TV and a lot of times even in photographs, you see the person's face. But by looking at the top of their head and watching them from their back continue to lift one foot over the other, it's a testimony to strength that I think is only portrayed in certain ways. And I think that, again, from your angle, you're capturing that in a really, really special way, that a lot of people don't think about up front, and they only see half the story. And so where I see you coming in is, you're telling the back half. It is the back half of the story. Like this, it's not a full story unless they see it from your angle as well. And I understand. Like, I understand why that, it presents difficulty, especially when you see something so clearly. Like, that's the other thing is you see something so clearly, and it's good. And being able to get the other side to think outside the box around whatever constraints they're working with to buy in. It's definitely, you know, something that's not unique to your situation, but something that I think a lot of people could relate to. And I think that's the important thing here when we think about that. As we close things out, the last question is really a little bit more reflective. What has the trade of photography taught you the most, whether it be about yourself or about the world?
Whoa. This is an amazing question. Who I would answer that in two parts. One, I would harken back to like the everyday miracles of like I had to train myself to look for the special moments in the day, which makes me see the world a little bit differently with a little bit more grace or a little bit more compassion or a little bit like with a little bit more joy and hope infused in my everyday wanderings. Especially going through the city, you typically we mind our business. Like we don't, I'm
Heads
not
down.
trying to like have conversation with somebody. I'm going from point A to point B. Like I'm not looking to pick up pamphlets. I'm not going for like a rickshaw ride through Central Park. It's not my gig. Like I'm okay. Let's keep it moving. But alongside of that, there's this thing of like, but what if this is beautiful? And then I think the other aspect of how it's changed me or it's changed how I see the world. Um, my other go-to phrase, because I feel like I'm a product um, of this exact thing, is hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Um, and as much as I lean into the creative aspect of who I am, what makes me, what drives me, what pushes me to how I see the world, how I engage with the world, how I speak to other people. Um, there still has to be an element of grit and determination and work. It's like we spoke about earlier. Like I hear no 75% more than I do hear yes. Um, and um, I have to adapt, I have to change, I have to learn from those. So I think what it has allowed me to do is not only be dug in so much that I want to make this work, but also like be humble enough, no matter how far along you are in your career, to be like, what can I learn from this? And I think that if we stop being students of every type of interaction that we have, because you never know when the wheels are going to fall off in an interaction. You could say something stupid. Um, but I think, yeah, constantly being a student and wanting to share alongside with a whole lot of hard work uh, is something that's yeah, important.
I love that. That's the perfect way to round things out, Paul. Just finding the humanity within your trade is definitely one of the most powerful takeaways I think we can all lean into. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for sharing with me today. Thanks for coming on, for giving us a different perspective, and for really opening us up to this world that we knew nothing about. Congratulations on all the work that you've done. I know that
Thank
you're
you.
only getting started. I want everybody listening, check out Paul, check out his work. To anyone who's ever run the New York City Marathon, it doesn't take much. Just look at these pictures, and you're gonna feel it in your soul. I know I did. So thanks for the time today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.